Welcome back. Now, today we will be discussing um, supply chain management strategy and design, which is chapter 10 as part of our discussion of operations management topics. And in this lecture, we'll be focusing on management of supply chain in general, also with a special emphasis on green or sustainable supply chains as are becoming more and more prevalent in today's day and age. Then we look at information technology as a supply chain enabler, and many of the tools that we have discussed in the previous chapters will try to understand them in the context of supply chain area. And then we'll address the issue of supply chain integration, various supply chain management software, and how one goes about measuring supply chain performance. Supply chains are all facilities, functions, and activities associated with the flow of transformation of goods and services from all the way from raw material to customer, as well as the associated information flows and even monetary flows. So it is basically an integrated group of processes to source, which is done through procurement, making, which is handled by the production or manufacturing aspect of the company, and then delivering the product through distribution channel, all the way from wholesalers, retailers, all the way to the end consumer. So, and then this is all tied up through the information is make sure those linkages are working so that the feedback loops are in place and control mechanisms are available. So an example of supply chain, typically, so if you think of various generic product, if you will, we have the basic materials coming in, other sources, whether it's timber or other mined items, which are bringing in through various modes of transportation from tier 3 suppliers, the furthest away from the manufacturing facility, to tier 2 suppliers and tier 1, all the way to which is the primary suppliers of the companies. And these are the various factories and their warehouses, and the information is being processed as to what raw materials are available. And that once the factories process the product, that is going through finished good warehouses to distribution areas, the wholesalers, and the various retail stores, all the way to the end consumers, which are buying the product. So same example can be seen for supply chain for a denim jean, for example. So you have cotton suppliers from China and the United States, and Mexico, India, etc., and indigo dye is coming from China and India. So you have a variety of products coming in, raw material, which are all going into creating thread, basic textile and denim cloth, and then sewing material, and that is being shipped over to United States if it's being done, for example, by Levi's jeans, which is being cut into different, shipping information. So it's being cut and then manufacturing facility and all the way to shipping to various wholesalers throughout and retailers, all the way to retail establishments, which are monitoring the demand as well as supply through supply chain information systems, and out goes all the way to the end consumer. So in this case, the value proposition in a typical supply chain, and in this case, let's take the example of a beer, Budweiser beer, for example. So hops, grains, various grains that are needed are coming from various farms, from various variety of suppliers. And in this case, notice the hop grains and is going into the grain mill, and there's suppliers for aluminum cans and the other suppliers for bottles, glass bottles. So in this case, you can see the monetary value, which is, so in this case, you have $1.18 coming in here for the manufacturing, whereas hops and grains is about 34 cents. And that is going into the brewer, which actually is then the manufacturing cost of $3.36, which goes to the distributor, which after their margin comes to a grocery store at $4.62, which they end up selling at $6.99 for 6 12-ounce bottles. So that's an example of how the value is added at every aspect of supply. So credit is flowing from supplier to manufacturer to wholesaler to retailer. Material is also flowing this way. And on the other hand, design data, which is coming back in terms of what they like, what they don't like, is coming reverse, as well as market research data, orders and cash flow and scheduling information is going back all the way. To see the value proposition in the context of companies that exist today, if you think of iPod versus HP notebook computers, you could see majority of in an HP environment, you have HP's margin is about 28% compared to other cost of goods sold. You can see majority of the remainder of the product, the cost is shared among variety of other people. So their own margin is about 28%, whereas in contrast, Apple's margins are about 36%, much more lofty premiums in this case, and they actually end up giving lower piece of the pie to the rest of their suppliers. So they end up capturing a larger share of the supply chain profits for themselves in this case. So it's an example of comparison as to business sustainability in the long run. Supply chains for services and service providers, it actually becomes more difficult than manufacturing because it does not necessarily focus on the flow of the physical goods. In many cases, it is just on the intangible aspects as well as information that is moving back and forth. Focuses on human resources and support services and typically are much more compact and less extended. So you don't have several series of suppliers and delivery providers such as wholesalers and distributors that are involved in service provision. In terms of value chain is a concept of every step of the raw material to the eventual end user. Where is the value being added? Ultimate goal is to deliver the maximum value to the end user. So in supply chain, which typically activities that get raw material and sub-assemblies into manufacturing operation. In this case, the goal of supply chain and value chain is pretty much the same. And there's another term that is used, which is known as demand chain, which is also focuses on increased value for any part of the or all of the chain. And all these terms are used interchangeably in the supply chain management universe. Value, the term means the creation of value for customer is important aspect of the supply chain. So that becomes the key aspect in all this. So now how do we manage supply chains? So supply chain management, or SCM, is the integration of all activities that procure material or services, transform them into intermediate goods and final product, and deliver them to customers. So managing flow of information through supply chain in order to attain the level of synchronization that is needed that will make it more responsive to the customer needs and thereby lowering cost. These days, in today's day and age, the competition is no longer between companies, but between supply chain of those companies. So you are only as good as your weakest link in your supply chain. Important activities determine who your transportation vendors are, credit and cash transfers, suppliers, who your distributors and banks are, account payables and receivables, warehousing and inventory order fulfillment, sharing customer forecasting and product information. How good is that information exchange? So keys to effective supply chain management is information, timely information, and accuracy of information is important. Communication, making sure there are frequent lines and open lines of communication between various supply chain players, as well as the tendency to use the communication in case there are any updates. Cooperation as well as trust is a must. It's one of the prerequisites for effectiveness in supply chain. In terms of supply chain uncertainty and inventory, this is one of the major objectives of supply chain is to respond to uncertainty. Anytime the demand changes or any fluctuations that happen, supply chain has to address that and make sure the right amount of supplies are available at the right time, at the right place to address that issue. So respond to uncertainty in customer demand without creating a costly excessive inventory. And negative effects of uncertainty, lateness or incomplete orders that typically happen. So inventory typically serves as an insurance against supply chain uncertainty. Anytime you are unsure about any player in a supply chain not being able to do their job effectively, some inventory acts as a buffer, as insurance to handle such eventualities. So factors that contribute to uncertainty: inaccurate demand forecasting, long variable lead times, late deliveries, incomplete shipments, product changes, batch ordering, and price fluctuations and discounts. And also inflated orders. A lot of times there is a padding of orders done by the customer. The retail store actually have an increased demand by 200 units, but they may order 110 just to carry some extra in case, or thinking the demand may go up, but it doesn't, and the rest of the items just then fall back, and accordingly everybody ends up padding the schedule, which we cover in the bullwhip effect. So in this case, anytime bullwhip effect is the term comes from the origin how a movement of the hand will generate enough oscillating movement throughout the whip. At the tail end of the whip, there will be a much more wider fluctuation. So that's the whole idea of, so downstream customer who typically the demand has been very steady, but all of a sudden you see a small blip in demand by customers buying a lot more than they need, or one-time purchase. But because of that additional purchase, retailer may have a tendency to assume the actual demand has increased. So because of that, they end up ordering more to pad their schedule, pad their inventory order by a few extra items, which may be assumed by a tier 1 supplier thinking that the demand actually has gone up. So they may end up in turn ordering from their tier 2 supplier even more inventory to take care of some additional unanticipated demand, which kind of progresses back, and the inventory that is being kept all the way upstream to the basic supplier becomes pretty large, to the point where it is not sustainable throughout this case. Another tool to handle inventory uncertainty, supply chain uncertainty, is risk pooling, which is hedging all the risks by aggregating that so that when risks are aggregated, pooled together, it reduces the impact of individual risks. So in this case, combine inventories of a multiple location into one. This is one of the reasons why Blockbuster was not effectively able to compete with a company like Netflix, where you see Netflix, even if they are in the business of shipping DVD at a time, whereas in contrast to Blockbuster, which has multiple stores, each carrying particular titles. So demand in one store for a particular movie title may be larger compared to another store. They can't predict ahead of time what the demand is going to be. So their supplies have a greater mismatch. As a result, they have to give a lot more of rain checks and unhappy customers. Whereas in case of Netflix, if they have to ship out DVDs, they can easily adjust a lesser demand of one title with more demand for the same title from another parts or the demographics of the customer base. So there is averaging, which reduces variability in this case. So that's where the concept of risk pooling comes in. So you end up reducing, when you combine inventory from multiple locations into one, have one central warehouse that does allow for reducing risk, reduce the number of parts and product variability. So the number of parts that are used, when they are reduced, also reduces the number of different variations of sub-assemblies and parts that you have to keep in stock, which actually makes it easier for bringing down the costs related to supply chain. Create flexible capacity in this case. Now, green supply chains, this is where the concept of sustainability comes into play. Meet present needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. That's the basic definition of sustainability. So in this case, the idea is to sustain not only human resources, but also social resources that you have. It can be cost-effective and profitable. So there's no need to ship out any additional material than need to be. What's the point of shipping something in the forward supply chain only to be returned back? That's not sustainable. So this green supply chain can provide impetus for product and process innovations. So we focus on new, improved ways of doing things so as to they are much more sustainable in the long run. Impetus comes from downstream in the supply chain from the customer side and moves upstream to the supplier. So for example, based on what the customers indicated, Walmart has instituted green supply chain and has been able to push the same agenda to its suppliers. Sustainability and quality management, reducing waste through quality programs help achieve sustainability goals. Improving fuel efficiency of vehicles. So those are all, telecommuting is another area. If work can be done from home, that's less carbon footprint that is being created, in this case, by the workers. Eco-friendly packaging material that is being used in shipping products, and energy efficient facilities, which maybe have self-powering off lights at the end of the shift, etc. Information technology is an important supply chain enabler. So in this case, information links all aspects of supply chain in e-business. So replacement of physical business processes with electronic ones. So maybe a lot of work can be done online. Computer orders can be taken on the computer. Electronic data interchange, computer-to-computer exchange of business documents sent via emails or direct processing between two businesses. Barcodes and point of sale, which create instantaneous computer record of a sale. RFIDs, radio frequency identification technology that can send product data for an item to a reader via radio waves. And we'll talk about all these in detail. Internet, of course, we all know, allow companies to communicate with supplier, customers, shippers. So it's a invaluable source of information exchange. And then build to order, direct sell to customer model via the internet. So customers configure the right type of product that they need, and based on that, product is produced and delivered to the customer directly. So various supply chain enablers, you can see the EDI, the barcode, internet, and RFID, which will cover all of these in detail. In terms of e-business and supply chain management, savings due to low transaction cost, because you are reducing the middleman, a lot of intermediary roles are being taken out. Shorter supply chain response time, so you can directly and quickly address what the needs of the customers are. Wider pressure and presence and increased visibility, in this case, of where in the system is the product and how quickly will it reach the customer. Improved services, and it offers great choices and more information to the customer. They can check the status of their package at UPS tracking system, for example, or even be able to get a sense of how long will it take to revise something, and so on and so forth. Collection and analysis of huge amount of customer data and preferences in terms of data mining and finding customer preferences so that process improvements and product improvements can be initiated. And access to global markets for suppliers and distribution channels in this case. So let's look at the electronic data interchange. It's a computer exchange of documents in a standard format. It can be used for purchasing, shipping, and receiving. Improve customer service, reduce the paperwork, increase productivity, improve billing and cost efficiency. So some of the things that are obvious that are associated with electronic data interchange rather than paperwork, pushing paper. Also reduce the bullwhip through information sharing so that more accurate information is being shared in a timely fashion, thereby reducing that need for padding the inventory numbers. Barcodes, which could be in a 3-dimensional or 2-dimensional format, are automated data collection systems. It contains identifying information, provide instantaneous tracking information for where the products are. Checkout scanners create point of sale data, update inventory records, identify trends, order materials, schedule orders, plan deliveries. All those can be done through barcodes much quickly. In terms of RFID, you can see RFIDs could be passive over here behind a label, or it could be active in terms of actually inserted in a product. So in this case, use radio waves to transfer data from chip to a reader, provide complete visibility of product location, continuous inventory monitoring, and reduce labor to manage inventories in this case, because everything can be tracked through radio waves rather than physically moving the product around in a warehouse to find if we have the right item. Reduce inventory cost. It has not been standardized yet to this point, but significant steps have been taken to arrive to that point. Difficult to track between systems, so those are some of the downsides. In terms of RFID capabilities, you could see in terms of direct packages through conveyor, so you can even use RFID in automated storage and retrieval system. It can be read items in inventory and store it in various distribution warehouse. So UPS can track and indicate as to where the package is at any point of a supply chain. Employees find items in bins, etc., and so they can quickly get the product ready for shipping and keep tracks of item during shipment, as well as customers find right pair of jean based on identifying easy search computer terminals in stores. So various RFID tag attributes. So you can see active versus passive IDs that I have indicated. So in this case, tag power source is internal to tag. So in this case, the active RFID is emitting the signal, whereas passive RFID is energy transferred from radio frequency from the reader to, so once the reader is pointed towards the passive RFID, that's where the data will be collected. We have the tag batteries there in active, there's no tag battery over here. Availability of power is continuous in active, whereas only in the field of the reader. That's where the radio frequency will transfer that power. Required signal strength to tag is very low, whereas it's very high is needed just to tag the item. Up to 100-meter range, whereas over here it's up to 3 to 5 meter, usually less, because you have to be really close to for the radio frequency to work. Multi-tag readings, 1,000 of tag recognized up to 100 miles per hour. So because of active nature of it. Whereas over here, only few hundred items within 3 meters of the reader can be identified. Because you're looking at only 125 bytes of read-write capability in a passive RFID compared to 128 kilobytes. So this is 1,000 times more information that can be captured, much more sophisticated access and search. Now in terms of supply chain integration, you're looking at shared information among supply chain members. It does allow you to reduce bullwhip effect, early problems detection, and faster response that you end up getting build trust and confidence. Those are the things that we identified earlier. And one of the things that can be done is collaborative planning, forecasting, replenishment, and design in this case, which again allows you to, works a long way to reduce the bullwhip effect. It lowers the cost of various supply chain entities, higher capacity utilization, and improved customer service level. Stop. Okay. And higher capacity utilization and improved service levels. So in this case, Then we can use, for supply chain integration, coordinated workflow production and operation procurement, which really supply chain integration goes a long way in improving production efficiencies, faster response, improved service to customers, as well as quicker new product to market. Also, it adopt new business models and technologies. By having integrated supply chain, you have penetration of new markets much quickly and successfully, creation of new products when feedback from customers is received, improve efficiencies, and even mass customization. Collaborative planning, forecasting, and replenishment is another tool that is used a lot to have two entities in a supply chain work collaboratively so that they can plan, collectively forecast the right amount of product and replenishment. So this goes a long way in reducing the bullwhip effect. So for example, when Walmart runs out of diapers, that information is directly transmitted from the point of sale when they sell their the batch of diapers before which triggers the replenishment level. Procter & Gamble will directly know that before even Walmart would realize that, and that will issue the necessary steps to replenish that inventory by the supplier. So that's where the collaborative planning, forecasting, and replenishment comes in. Two or more companies in a supply chain to synchronize their demand forecast in a single plan to meet customer demand. So parties electronically exchange what have been the past sale trends, what's the point of sale data, what's the on-hand inventory, schedule promotion forecast, so that they can work hand in hand so the maximum amount of product can be sold to the right customer at the right time in a collective. So SCM software, you have the enterprise resource planning software, which is we had talked about in the previous lectures. Software that integrates component of companies by sharing and organizing information and data. So you could have, it has back office processes, which could be human resource, benefit payroll, manufacturing in terms of material requirement planning, scheduling, accounting and finance, which talks about account payables and receivables, general ledger, asset management. Then data analysis in terms of what the product will cost or the job process will cost. Supply chain management aspects of forecasting, purchasing, distribution. And then you have the front end dealing with the customer. You have sales and marketing, sales order pricing issues, as well as customer service, field service, or quality issues that customers may convey. So in this case, you have the supply chain information system. You have the ERP, which is addressing not only your suppliers, your customers, but the internal supply chain. Then the supply resource management, relationship management, as well as customer relationship management, and the decision support system. And then you have network design, warehouse transportation planning, warehouse management, transportation execution. So the variety of, so this is all the way from strategic decision making to tactical planning to routine decision making to execution and transaction processing that can be used. In this case, let's move on to measuring supply chain performances. So the metric that I use to measure supply chain performance, one is inventory turnover. And inventory turns are basically calculated by cost of goods sold divided by average aggregate value of inventory. The second one is total value of inventory at cost. So that is average aggregate value of inventory is equal to this is some product of average inventory of a particular item multiplied by unit value of that items. And you add them all across every single item that we have. And the third metric is the days of supply. How many days worth of supply do you have of a particular item? And that is basically average aggregate inventory value divided by cost of goods sold, which is divided on a per day basis, divided by 365 days. And because in order to come with days of supply. If we don't have this, then it'll be years of supply. The final one is fill rate, which is fraction of order filled by a distribution center within a specific period of time. So here is an example of how key performance indicators are calculated. You have a motorcycle company manufacturing a variety of motorcycles. Last year, the cost of goods sold was $425 million. The company had a falling average value of production material and parts, and that's given to you. So you have $4.6 million in production material and parts. Work in process is $17.46 million, and finished good is $12.32 million. Altogether, total average aggregate value of inventory, which is adding up these three numbers, gives you $34.4 million approximately. And this wants to know the number of inventory turns and days of supply. So you have this number of $34.4 million, okay, and that when divided by from 425 million, which is the total cost of goods sold, will give you 12.3 turns of inventory. The higher the number of inventory turns, the better it is. That is, how often do you turn the inventory in this case. The lower it is, the worse it is. Days of supply, in this case, if you're turning inventory 12 times a year, so you're actually carrying about approximately 30 days worth of supply, because there are 12 months in a year, if you will, so approximately a month. So that's where this is coming from. So in this case, days of supply, which is exact reverse of it, if you can look at it. This is exactly reverse, and now divided by 365, so 12.3 times a year inventory turns. So in 1 year, you actually go through your inventory 12.3 times. So in this case, days of supply is about 29.6 days. That's how the numbers are being calculated. Now, in terms of process control and supply chain operations reference, process control is not only for manufacturing operation, can be used for any process of supply chain. So the process control concept that we talked about in chapter of processes now can be used in any aspect of supply chain entities throughout your supply chain. So supply chain operations reference is a cross-industry supply chain diagnostic tool maintained by Supply Chain Council. So in this case, you can see it involves all the way from your supplier's supplier to your supplier to your company to your customer and your customer's customer. So the supply chain continues on. And throughout this, there is a delivery by supplier, which is being connected with the sourcing of that product, making, delivering, and as necessary return. And then same thing, source, make, deliver, return. Source, make, deliver, return in every aspect of supply chain. And those four aspects are key. In this case, plan, source, make, deliver, return is the key aspect. In this case, notice that all of this is going through that planning. So that's the overarching. So you have planning, develop a course of action that best meets sourcing, production, delivery requirements. So you design your supply chain, then you actually source the product material, make the product, deliver it, finished goods, and then manage the returns as needed. And in this case, the performance metric is basically for each one, you have customer facing, the front end office is focusing on delivery reliability, how often the right type of product is delivered to the right customer. So focus on delivery performance, percentage of order delivered on time and in full to the customer. Another metric that can be used is fill rate, percentage of order shipped within 24 hours of order receipt. Perfect order fulfillment, percentage order delivered on time and in full, perfectly matched with order and no errors. Same way, other supply chain responsiveness, number of days from the order receipt to customer delivery. Supply chain response time, again, you can see these are all related to customers. Then you have internal, within the company, those are all cost associated and efficiency issues. So cost will be supply chain management cost, both direct and indirect cost, cost of goods sold, value-added productivity, warranty returns, processing cost. Then you have cash-to-cash cycle time, which is used a lot in the industry, the number of days that cash is tied up as working capital. Inventory, days of supply, we covered that, and asset turn, inventory turns that I'll be looking at. So that pretty much wraps up our discussion of supply chain strategy. And we I'll see you again when we cover future topics on supply chain of operations management in this discussion of these topics. Take care.